I'm going to start by removing the hubcap. If you can't pull it off with your fingers, you can use a little pry bar. Just be very careful not to break the hubcap or damage the rim. Take a 21mm socket and remove all 5 of your lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Now with the wheel off, you can see 2 17mm nuts and 1 bolt. Let's start by removing all 3 of these. This control arm is now separating from the ball joint, which is exactly what you want, so that's perfect. At the top of the ball joint right here, you'll see this cotter pin that goes through the castle nut and the stud. We'll need to remove this, and the way this thing works, it's not actually bent over like your typical cotter pin. It kind of hooks over and it's spring loaded, so with a pick I'm going to try to unhook it just like that and then remove it. Now with a 30mm 12-point socket, let's remove the axle nut. Make sure the axle pushes through the hub, which this one does. Now let's separate the ball joint from the control arm, and the way I'm going to do that is with a large pry bar. I'm going to pry the control arm down. Looks like this got stuck in here, so let's just unwedge it. Okay, move the ball joint to the side to where it's not going to make contact with the, or not make contact, but to where it's not going to go back into the holes, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Get your pry bar out. At this point, we can push the axle through and pull the knuckle out. Now my next step is going to be removing this outer tie rod from the knuckle. I know I should have already done it, but to be honest, I thought I could get away without doing that. So the same style cotter pin here, kind of hook type. So unhook it, pull it out. Let's get a 17mm socket. Take that off. Now you can take your hammer on the knuckle. That should break the tie rod free from the knuckle. Oh, there it goes. Perfect. Set that aside. At this point, you can push the axle through, pull the knuckle out, and the axle should be able to just pop out of the knuckle here. Set that aside. Make sure you don't get your hand pinched in there. There we go. Now I can get my socket down in here with a swivel and an extension. 19mm socket. Let's try to take this nut off. Perfect. That one was pretty tight on there. Take the nut completely off. Now let's grab a pickle fork and take the ball joint out. Put it in here, hammer it in, and this should pop the ball joint free. And there it goes. Take the new ball joint and slide it in to the knuckle. You'll have to reuse the original nut just because of the design of it. It has to seat itself on the outside of the knuckle here. Now, it's going to be really hard to torque just because the knuckle's going to want to move around. So what I'm going to do is just make it nice and tight with my air gun and the socket here. The torque is only 52 foot-pounds for this nut, so it's not super tight. I'm just going to snug it up. Okay, that's as tight as it'll get. Hopefully the cotter pin lines up. It does. That's perfect. And these style cotter pins you can reuse if you'd like, since they don't have to get peened over. So I'll just put it over, press it on to lock it in. Now let's bring the knuckle back out. Be careful of your ball joint boot at this point. You don't want it to get jammed into the control arm and get damaged. Now you can pull the knuckle out and slide the axle into the hub. There we go. Make sure it goes in. Sometimes you need to wiggle it to line up the splines. And at this point, we can grab our pry bar, bring the control arm down, and with the control arm down like that, now if you pull the control arm down, you can slide the ball joint into it. Give it a little wiggle so it can seat itself in. Let's mount it on the bottom. Put your 2 nuts on. And then if your bolt doesn't line up right off the bat, sometimes it doesn't, you can either press this down by hand and make it line up. If that still doesn't work and it's stiff and it just doesn't want to cooperate, What you can do is actually just tighten these two nuts. That'll suck the ball joint up against the control arm, then you can put your bolt in. Okay, let's snug these up and then we'll torque them. 66 foot-pounds for all three of these. Let's get the axle nut back on. I'm gonna snug it down. You'll see me use my air impact to do it. I'm not tightening it with it. I'm just using it to run it down quick, and then we'll torque it to 159 foot-pounds. Okay, that stopped right there. Let's torque it. All right, let's tighten it up. I have my pry bar holding onto the lug studs so the hub doesn't want to spin. That's 159 right there. Now you can see it lines up with the mark where it was peened over earlier, so let's peen it over again. That's how you lock these in. So grab a chisel or a punch or whatever you have and just punch this in a little bit. All right, that's good right there. You don't have to go crazy. Now let's reconnect our tie rod end. Let's snug this up. Now let's torque it to 36 foot-pounds. Right there, and my cotter pin slot lines up, I'd say about 90% of the way, so I'm going to tighten just a little more. You always want to tighten to get these to line up and never loosen. Let's put the cotter pin in. I'm going to reuse the factory cotter pin. Like I said, with these style, you can reuse them. Perfect, that locks in. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them to 76 foot-pounds. Let's not forget about the hubcap, and if you are putting these on, if you have them, make sure that this cutout goes over your valve stem, otherwise you'll ruin it. So these are going to be a little tricky to install. You have to hold them in several different places, and they keep wanting to pop off. There we go. Perfect.